Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you on Tuesday, July 25th. And finally, some good news for silver investors and some comments out of someone who maybe is already a legend in the silver industry, or at least becoming so in my mind, who is Keith Neumeyer, CEO of First Majestic Silver, who had an interview I was listening to this morning and had, as he often does, some great comments and especially some good news of, well, something you might be able to think of as a floor and a good factor that if you are investing in silver, certainly at this point, I think we have a little news that'll help make you feel better. First, a quick few notes about Keith. If you're not familiar with him, he's the CEO of a mining company called First Majestic Silver, which is actually one of my favorite miners. Again, be careful if you are investing in the silver miners. Remember, there is a difference between a mining company and owning physical bullion. There's a whole other set of factors that can influence the price. Now, if you have miners that are in good shape and you have a rise in silver price, you can do really well. Of course, if you have a miner that doesn't end up finding anything, then you might have a little bit of a problem. And as I've learned from the great Rick Rule, another great, I guess he's resources, but also dabbles in gold and silver miners. And one of the things he often says is, especially in the mining business, really thinking about the people who are running it, finding good leadership, trustworthy leadership. Excuse me. And one of the things that I like about Keith is I've been listening to his interviews for probably about a year or so now. And seems like a really intelligent guy to me. Although especially he's one of the only mining CEOs that has been actively talking about how he sees the manipulation in the silver market, understands what's going on. What's interesting is Keith actually has a markets and trading background. So perhaps that's helping him to see a little more clearly what seems like some of the other mining companies are either missing or perhaps don't want to say. Again, if your main product is to sell silver and the price is suppressed by a bunch of bullion banks that write paper contracts they can't deliver, you would think the CEO has a responsibility to the shareholders to do what he can to maximize the value of the business. So there may be some people who are some of the CEOs that aren't aware of the manipulation or not seeing it or understanding it. The other explanation that gets passed around quite a bit, which I think there's credence to, is that a lot of these miners are dependent upon the banks for financing. So if you go out saying that your financer is doing some illegal stuff, do they pull the financing and leave you in a tough situation? That could be happening. Again, it's somewhat speculation, although I think there's some truth there. But in either case, it's nice that Keith has been speaking up adamantly, and certainly for people who are investing in silver, when I was making my decision, again, I wouldn't call myself a mining analyst, although I speak to people that are mining analysts that I think really know their stuff. First Majestic was one of the ones that I've consistently heard good feedback about. And the idea that the CEO has the same perspective makes me think, well, hopefully that there's also some planning around that, and I mean that in the sense that, at least if you understand there's the manipulation, adjusting your business to incorporate that, whether that means not selling as much of your product now as you can, which again, there's a lot of tricky factors that go into that. It's hard to run a company under these circumstances, but at least to the degree that someone understands what I believe is going on and what a lot of others in the market believe is going on, has really caught my attention, and I've been really impressed with Keith. And what he mentioned in today's interview, that hopefully if you're sitting there looking at the price of silver, if you're already invested or if you're thinking of investing with silver, I guess it's over 16 bucks today. And one of the things people are worried about, obviously, if you buy something and it goes down, although a few notes here from Keith's interview, he mentioned that there are basically two metrics that you can think of. Now, one is the all-in sustaining cost, which he defined as the amount it costs just to sustain current business at current levels without any further exploration. So think of it as just you have certain mining projects out there and you want to maintain those, and what is the cost to do that? Which Keith said is about $13 to $15 per ounce of silver. So if you factor in all the costs that go into digging the metal out of the ground from maintaining the existing projects, cost about 13 to 15 bucks. So there's a little bit of a floor in the sense that, again, when we're talking about paper, you can drive prices to extreme levels, but what are you going to do? Drive it down to 15, 14 bucks? At some point, it no longer becomes financially viable for people to be mining it. People stop mining it, that further reduces the supply, and which at some point, when the manipulation is overwhelmed, you have more people chasing less silver. So then Keith went on to also mention the all-in cost, which would be looking at the mine, looking at future projects. So in an ideal world, if you want to continue to grow the business, you're finding other good sites, you want to increase production in the 2 to 5 year time frame from now, he said that gets up around $20 per ounce. So what's going to happen is that with silver at 15 or 16 bucks, you're not going to have as many new projects coming on. You're not going to have as much supply in the future as you would if the prices were higher. So one of the ways that the market regulates itself, and again, we've talked a lot about how there's X amount of silver and then there's all these paper contracts, and at some point does someone show up and want delivery of their metal and it's not there? Well, if you're reducing the supply because of where the price is now, that is just another factor that makes the situation a little bit more extreme. So again, when you're sitting there watching it, just dither along day after day, now what's been year after year. Again, keep in mind, this is a pretty unusual situation in my career and in my study of the history of markets. I haven't come across anything quite like this. So this is, again, and I understand why it's confusing for people. I understand why many struggle with it and get frustrated, because it's a very unusual situation that's dragged on a lot longer than I think most people have expected. But again, one of the things that has helped me to feel comfortable about investing in silver is that the skew, when you look at what's the potential upside versus what's the potential downside, again, in manipulated markets, anything can happen in the short term. But what I wanted to pass along today was how Keith explains how there's a bit of a floor where it's almost hard to drive it that much lower without creating even more fuel for the eventual rise. So if you want to hear more, we're going to link to that interview below. I'd highly recommend listening to any of Keith's commentary. Really helpful information for silver investors. Certainly a company worth looking into. I'm not giving any specific financial advice here, except to let you know that I am an investor in First Majestic. And again, I think you can learn a lot from Keith. So with that said, hit the subscribe button below, and we will see you again tomorrow, and hope you're having a great day. Thanks.